All right, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. If other people come in, they can catch up with the recording that'll go out later on. So we'll be recording this session. So if you want to come back to it, it'll be up on YouTube. You'll be able to find it there. We'll also be sharing out the slideshow for this after this session. So you'll have access to those slides as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. For people who don't know me, my name is Robert Lehman. I'm the Cedar Commissions program lead. And then I also am the booking and artistic manager at the Cedar. And so I've been the Cedar Commissions program lead this last year, and then I helped assist the program 2 years ago. So I'll be continuing to be the program lead this year as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction and an overview for what to expect tonight. So we'll talk a little bit about the Cedar Commissions, what it's been, a little bit of the past history. We'll give an overview of the Cedar Commissions, what artists do, what artists receive, who's eligible. We'll do a little bit of a brief question break after that, just covering kind of the program itself. And then we'll do an overview of the application to the program. And then we'll do some Q&A about that as well. So hopping into the introduction, the Cedar, as some of you may know, is a nonprofit. And so our mission is to promote intercultural appreciation and understanding through the presentation of global music and dance. There are 4 things that we specifically focus on. We focus on artistic excellence and integrity, a diversity of programming, community outreach, and then support for emerging artists. The Cedar Commissions as a program really falls under that 4th point. And that was something that we felt like was important to continue this last year, especially when opportunities for artists to create music, play music were becoming more and more scarce. So we made some adaptations to the program this last year. The performance were fully virtual. We're hoping that we don't have to do that this year. And it's looking optimistic so far, tentatively hopeful. But yeah, that is just like a little bit of background there. In terms of what the Cedar Commissions are and what they've been, they were previously called the 416 Commissions. This was a series of concerts that we had on a series of Monday nights, but it still followed that same format, just in terms of commissioning early career or emerging Minnesotan artists and musicians. And each artist is asked to create 30 to 45 minutes of new music for the Cedar stage. Since the program's launch, the Cedar has commissioned over 60 artists of diverse styles and backgrounds. Some of you may know the artists like Dessa, Maria Issa, Adam Levy, Dua Saleh did it a couple of years ago. Hassan Shahidi, you can see in the photo here, he was part of the cohort this last year. And from the start of it, the Cedar Commissions has always been supported by Jerome Foundation. And I think this is our 11th year. So we've been doing it for a while. We don't have a ton of information currently on our website about past programs, but you can see information about just this last year if you visit the Cedar Commission's website there and learn a little bit more about each of those artists' programs. Another helpful resource in terms of past stuff is each of the artists' programs from this last year are up on YouTube. And you can find some from past years as well, just if you want to get a sense of what that might look like. In terms of what Cedar Commissions artists do, I already touched on the creation of the new music. That happens over a 6-month time frame between September and February. We define new music as music that hasn't been previously written, composed, recorded, or performed. I would encourage people to think of this as 100% new music. If you have, let's say that you have 3 tracks or 4 tracks that are up on Bandcamp or out on Spotify, and you're like, hey, can I create an album that's based on these 3 or 4 things? I would encourage people to think of it as no, go with a different idea for this one. If needed, you can always pull on previous ideas, but really the heart of the grant is pushing artists to create new music. Part of part of this is artists debuting their work at a live public concert in February of 2022. As I said, this last year, those were all virtual performances because of COVID, but we're planning to have those as live public performances this coming year. Artists are also required to attend 6 cohort meetings, and those are held each month at the Cedar from September to January. Those cover a variety of things. There's some marketing involved, promo and publicity. There are a couple different tech conversations about lighting, about inputs, about the tech specs of the Cedar and what's possible within the Cedar space. There's some of the meetings are dedicated to artist feedback on each of the artist programs. Sometimes that comes from the cohort artists themselves, and then other times that comes from outside artists, past Cedar Commissions artists, and sometimes program staff as well. And then at the end of the program, artists are required to participate in a wrap-up meeting, talking about their experience, and then also to complete an evaluation. So in terms of what Cedar Commissions artists receive, they receive $4,000. That's a $4,000 commission that's paid out in September 2021. And then you receive a $500 production stipend. And so that can be used for a variety of different things. Some artists, depending on their performance experience, will opt to use that for an additional tech rehearsal to practice within the space, a separate time from the sound check that comes before the final performance. You know, for some artists, if they're newer to performing in general, or if they're newer to performing at the Cedar, those tech rehearsals are pretty beneficial. But then other artists have performed at the Cedar several times, you know, gig around town. That tech rehearsal might not be as helpful in terms of sorting out kinks for that final performance. That tech stipend also can be used for backline, if there's special backline that you need rented in. If you need to rent in like a specific projector or something like that, that's something that that production stipend can be used for as well, or specific lighting, things like that. And that gets paid out to the artist after the final performance in February. In terms of artistic mentorship, different from past year's budgets, there's $250 just reserved for artistic mentorship for each artist. This can either be working with a mentor that you're already connected with, or it can be a process of the Cedar working with you to connect with somebody within our networks. And that's just somebody, I think you're required to meet with them twice throughout the period. You'll also receive administrative and marketing support from the Cedar staff. That is a variety of different things. This year, the Cedar did in-depth interviews and features with each of the artists. So those came out via our blog. They did individual marketing meetings with each artist in terms of really honing in on what is special about each artist's program, what they want to communicate to press, and then going a little bit through the press lists in terms of strategizing about who to potentially reach out to, who your audiences are, and where you want to focus. And then artists also receive high quality professional headshot photos, and then video of the final performance. One thing that I wanted to share about the video is that if you look at the video of this last year, you'll notice that it's super clear. It cuts to a lot of different shots. And that's pretty different from the video that we've had in past years. In past years, it's mostly been more video documentation, you know, just like a single camera from the back of the room. For this last year, we were able to spend money on editing and really produce these programs because they were going to be in the virtual space. So I'd anticipate that in this coming year, we'll need to bring those video budget items down, and it'll be more of that video documentation style, as opposed to something that's like cut and edited, like the ones were this last year. Eligibility. So in terms of thinking about who's eligible for a Cedar Commissions, Applicants from all musical genres and styles are eligible. That includes improvisational music, that includes experimental music. We just want to be able to, we just want you to articulate, be able to articulate what your plan is, you know, enough for the performance. And we're pretty flexible in terms of that. For some artists, it's a lot more rigid. For other artists, it's a lot more open. We're also committed to supporting a diverse cohort of artists that reflects our stewardship of global music, relationships, and our local community. Indigenous people and people of color are encouraged to apply. In terms of who's eligible, you also need to be an early career and emerging artist. This could look different for different people. You know, certain people might be an early career and emerging artist just 2 years, kind of into their more professional career. Other artists could still be early career and emerging, even after 15 years, you know? So there's a lot of flexibility in that definition. I would encourage people to check out Jerome's definition, which is linked on the call for artists. I would say, you know, things to think about are whether or not you feel like, you know, you've been substantially celebrated within the local community or recognized within the local community, or on a national scale as well. And then I'm going to hop over to the next slide here. One of the things to think about is that, oh, actually, I don't have it here. One of the other things that I was going to say is that we're looking for people who are vocational artists and people who are predominantly focused on, you know, creating music, writing music, performing music as, you know, one of their main occupations, or their main occupation. And so I would think of this in terms of, you know, if you've ever gotten paid for a gig, you know, you're eligible. As long as you're not, you know, super big already. In terms of other requirements, you need to apply as a lead artist and not as a group in order to be eligible. So there needs to be one person who's driving the project, one person who is articulating that project vision. It doesn't require you to just do it as an individual. We definitely encourage people to collaborate with other people. But in terms of that project vision should belong to a lead artist who's leading that project work. One thing that other people typically have questions about, collaborators and musicians in your project can definitely be part of more than one project, and quite a few different performances. You know, artists have had the same drummer, artists have had the same bassist across, you know, different Cedar Commissions artists, so that's definitely a possibility. You have to live in the state of Minnesota to be eligible. It's not just the Twin Cities, it can be greater Minnesota as well. And then full-time degree-seeking students aren't eligible for the Cedar Commissions. And there's some questions that typically come up with this. People ask, like, you know, if I'm not in a degree program during the application cycle, but then I'm in a degree program during the Cedar Commissions period, like, am I still eligible? Or if I'm going to be in a degree program in the fall, but then I won't be in it, you know, in the springtime when the performance happens, would I still be eligible? Unfortunately, if you're in a degree program at any time in that period, you aren't eligible for Cedar Commissions. So that's just a clarification there. Yeah, I think that's it for that section. I'm just going to quick check my notes just to see if there's anything that I'm forgetting here. Okay, so I think that brings us to our first question break. Just curious what questions are popping up related to the stuff that we just covered. Clarification from people, things that you're wondering about. You can either type those in the chat section, or you can unmute yourself and just ask those.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So Scott Keever here. In looking at the application, I'm not quite sure about how we, you know, if we're doing something, you know, in terms of like showing what we've done before, but then we have this idea of something we've never done before that involves textures or, let's say disciplines that we've never attempted before, but that we know we could handle and we could do. Do we create a mock-up or like a proof of concept for something like that? Or how do we, should we be presenting anything like that musically? Like, I don't know if my question is clear enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's really clear. It's a good question. I think in terms of the work samples, we want something that's going to demonstrate your facility as an artist, your facility as a composer, your skills there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a proof of concept of the thing that you're going towards itself. As long as it's something that shows us what your capabilities are, that's going to be what's most important. And then just tying that, just a little bit of text tying that towards your final project. So it could be something where you're saying, it's like I've taken guitar lessons for the last 13 years, and I have a lot of skills as a guitarist. And then you share with us a clip of you playing guitar, right? And you say, over the past 2 years, I've really been diving more into like mandolin, and that's a texture that I really want to dive into. And so there's a certain amount of, what was I going to say? With that, it's like, even though the sample that we see is a guitar sample, it's like you've shown to us that you have, general facility with string instruments, writing for string instruments. And so that would be something that would be, a strong work sample. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I think. Does that
Great.
answer it, Scott, or further clarity?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and then I just have one more add-on question to that. Does the idea have to have a concept behind it, or is it okay just to present a musical idea, like, hey, I want to explore these different musical textures without a concept necessarily, or is a concept kind of like more of a, if we had a concept behind that musical idea, is that going to help in conveying what we want to do?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question as well. I would say specifically for Cedar Commissions, kind of the story behind it all is something that ends up being weighted pretty heavily in the selection committee, just in terms of, why are those textures important to you? Where does this like final audience experience sit in terms of like your personal context, in terms of like a larger local context, in terms of a larger community context? Where does this idea, where do these motivations, where does this project idea sit in terms of, larger societal themes as well? Those proposals tend to be more successful within Cedar Commissions than projects that are more specifically focused on, I want to explore negative harmonies, but not necessarily tying that to something like a larger narrative, whether that's personal or societal. Yeah. And that's something that's like more specific to the Cedar Commissions, something that just gets weighted a little bit more for this particular grant.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Jenny, and I'm wondering about, I kind of feel like I have an understanding of this, but I just would like to hear you talk about it a little bit more. Just like the level of collaboration. So like if I'm interested in exploring my instrument plus this other genre or artist, like the level of collaboration where it's still my vision, but I'm pulling in somebody that does a craft that I can't necessarily write exactly what I want them to do. They're contributing a lot. I'm just interested to hear what you would have to say about like the level of collaboration that happens with the featured artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a good question as well. I think that there's there is a good chunk of flexibility in terms of artists bringing expertise. I would say as long as you're the one who's continuing to drive the project and you know, having a vision of what you would want from that artist, like I guess giving them a framework to create within, and as long as it's feeding into that larger project vision that belongs to you, that's good. That's good. One of the artists this last year, Beatrice, she doesn't play drums, and she was working with somebody who has drummed for a lot of people locally in the Twin Cities and had a lot of experience. And so with that, you know, once they got into a rehearsal space and they started playing Bea's tracks, Gloria was like, hey, like, I think that this would actually probably work a lot better than this type of a transition. Or you might want to try like this type of a beat underneath it, and just kind of propose those ideas. And they talked about them, figured out how they would fit in, and kind of went with what sounded best. So that type of collaboration is definitely encouraged.
I guess what I could just share specifically, like if I'm working with like a singer, it feels a little funny for it to be my project, but then asking them to write lyrics, because I'm never going to write good lyrics because that's not what I do, you know. And so like in that moment, it feels like, and we don't have to keep going with it, but maybe that would be something I would just need to work out if the time came. I actually have one more question.
Sure.
I feel like in past years, there has been a series of events, and it's looking more like this year there's one event in February. Is that right? For performances?
That's a good question. That's a good question. It would be like one weekend. So in the past years, we've run it as 3 artists per night. So there'll be 2 days, like a Friday and a Saturday, with 3 of the different projects per night. So it's kind of takes that shape over the weekend.
But it's not over a few weeks. It would be like centralized to one weekend, you said. Okay, thanks.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you, Dominic.
Okay. Yeah, I've got another question. I'm Nick. Just kind of going back to collaboration. I was just wondering, I know you talked about with the cohorts about using them for planning, but I was also wondering if at all it's used for kind of like creative exploration, bouncing ideas off other people. Is that what they've been used for in the past at all, or is it mostly just the planning of the shows and the progression of the of everything? Yeah,
that's a good question. I think it's something that's, you know, it's up to each cohort, like where you want to take it. There are certain artists that have, you know, kind of sent song samples back and forth to each other and have like developed those types of relationships where it's like, I'm thinking about this idea, and then one of the artists will, you know, share feedback back on that. There were 3 artists a couple of years ago that were pretty close and were bouncing ideas off each other in that way. In the past, like some Cedar Commissions artists have talked about like, oh, like you should be a part of my like Cedar Commissions project, or that type of collaboration. I haven't seen any of those conversations come to fruition within the commissioning period. But in terms of like the actual meetings themselves, I've found that artists typically use those spaces to put ideas out there. There's specifically one meeting where artists bring a sample of 1 or 2 songs from their performance, and they share out those ideas. And then as a group, you know, each of the artists says like what they'd hope for in terms of feedback from the other artists. And then you go through and get some support on those ideas. A lot of it happens kind of informally and in informal conversations as part of those meetings, just in terms of checking in about people's projects and where people are at in the creative process. There's one artist who is struggling with kind of like a writer's block. this last year and just couldn't quite get in the right headspace. And so they brought that to the meeting, and then a couple of different artists, you know, talked about like, you know, taking breaks or like getting different like mood lighting, or, you know, just like kind of writing down any ideas that you have right in the moment and stuff like that. And then, you know, came back the next meeting and that artist was like, damn, I've been so productive. I've been so creative. So that's like one example of kind of that type of collaboration or support.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think I'm going to hop on to the next section of this. There's some questions that people had sent in prior to this Zoom, and so we might touch base on some of those that still haven't been covered at the end. But there will be another section. There'll be another question section at the end as well. So we're going to move into like the application itself. And how do you apply? So you'll submit the following by Wednesday, June 30th by midnight to me. And so it's up to 2 pages or 3 minutes of video describing your project. And so we ask people to talk about your project idea, share a little bit about why your project is possible, and demonstrate a little bit in terms of your own artistic abilities, why you'd be able to pull off a project of this scale. And then articulate how this project is going to push your career as an emerging artist, push you to try something new, push you to try something that you've really wanted to for a long time but haven't quite jumped into. So one of the things that we look for is ways that artists are clearly pushing themselves or stretching themselves as an artist. And so Scott, you were asking that question about like, do you need something that demonstrates you already jumping into that area? That can be helpful. While also thinking about like, okay, how are you going to innovate? You know, how are you going to take this to a new space? This slide also kind of gets into that artistic relevance question and thinking about it on a micro level. You know, why is this important to you? But then also in a larger level. Some of the questions that are on the application itself are why you, why this project, why now, and why does it fit at the Cedar? Those are a lot of questions. And they're kind of deep questions to ask about the art that you're creating. But those were some of the questions that the selection panelists found particularly helpful and wanted to know more of from some of the project proposals in past years. One of the things to note, quite often we'll get project proposals where somebody is saying, you know, I want to write this new album of music that's based on X topic, and I want to record it and put it out as well, right? And then we find that predominantly they've used the budget funds towards recording or purchasing equipment, which can be part of, you know, it can be part of your application, it can be part of the project, but it shouldn't be the predominant focus of the project. It's ultimately up to you how you want to spend those funds, but some of the things to think about are allocating money for yourself, you know, compensating yourself for that creative time. Some of the artists in the past have decided to, you know, like basically take like wages for 1 day's work per week to take off from their main job. And that's how they've budgeted out kind of creative money for themselves. Other artists like maybe take a day off per month, or just think about the ways that you compensate yourself for your creative time and your investment in the project. And then in terms of compensating the other artists involved as well, those should be a big chunk of your budget. And so definitely like one of the examples that I bring up is Faise from a couple of years ago. She needed a specific mic to amplify her Ethiopian karar. And so that was something that she included in her project budget because it made sense. You know, it's like this was technology that was going to help this instrument sound the best on the Cedar stage. And so that was like, okay, great. You know, that makes sense. So I probably talked too much about that section. Let me just quick check my notes. Okay, I'm gonna hop to, Oh, okay, cool. Some of the notes that I have here are going to be things that I'll touch on later. One of the things that I also wanted to touch base about is that sometimes we get artists who like interpret that push as really trying something completely new that they don't necessarily have like the skill prerequisites to potentially be successful at, right? And so we'll get some artists who say like, you know, I've been a singer predominantly for my career and I haven't played any instruments before, and so I want to like learn to play the guitar throughout this commissioning period. That wouldn't be as strong of a proposal as somebody who, you know, has already been playing guitar, you know, has already been singing, and is, you know, allocating a small amount of money for guitar lessons. Like that would be a stronger proposal because this person has already articulated what their skills are in that area, and aren't just starting from like that, the ground floor, I guess. It's maybe a good metaphor. So I would recommend people not to think of it as like a skill development grant, but think about what are you building off of, the skills that you already have, the ideas that you already have, and how is that going to push you towards something new. In terms of one part of the feasibility of your project, we want to see a project budget. We want to see a rough timeline. If you just lay out what you're planning your process is by like a month, that is good enough for us, just in terms of when you're planning to do writing time, when you're planning to do rehearsals, when you're planning on having, you know, maybe the first draft of all of your songs done, first draft of the full work done. It doesn't have to be super, super detailed, but we do want to see that you've planned out when these things are going to happen within those 6 months. Another important part of this part is articulating that vision for that final performance. We want to know what you envision for, you know, that final night in the Cedar space. What do you want to have happening on stage? How do you want that to be affecting the audiences in an ideal situation? We want to be able to see that project vision. I threw an example budget up here. This is something that I think was pretty close to one of the budgets for one of the Cedar Commissions artists in past years. They paid themselves the most, and they were in charge of doing the songwriting and vocals. They had a couple different collaborators that were paid at a couple different levels. Maybe they paid the first saxophone player $750 because that saxophone player helped with instrumentation for the second saxophone player and kind of co-composing that section. But that's just kind of like a rough budget example. Sometimes people have requested to see what past budgets have included. Some of the things that you might also include in that budget are if you are paying rent for a rehearsal space for a couple times, that might be something that you factor in as part of the budget. And then again, talking about paying yourself for that research time and for creating the piece as well. And then for any small, you know, equipment purchases that you might be needing to make this happen as well. Okay, I think this is where I had some of my further notes. So we've talked quite a bit about this pushing you into kind of a new area of your career or the next step of your career as an emerging artist. Here, there are a couple different examples of artists. And so what that looks like might be different for each different artist. One of the things that I want to encourage people to think about is this something that you've done before? Is it something that you could do again? It's probably not the project for Cedar Commissions if the answer to both of those questions is yes, right? You want to think about something that is pushing you in a different direction. And maybe, I mean, I guess maybe it is something that you will do again in the future, but think about it taking you into a different area. These are just some of the categories that past projects have fallen into in terms of ways that artists have pushed themselves. In terms of Dua's project, they were looking at different sounds throughout the Afro diaspora. And so they were looking at some sounds from Southeast Asia, some sounds from Northeast Africa, and then also the American South, and combining those together with some of their past work. Kashimana's project, typically she had been singing and fronting a big like jazz funk fusion band. And so for her project, she specifically wanted to focus on a small vocal ensemble. And so she worked with 3 other singers and then 1 artist who played drums and bass. And so that was a total palette shift for her. For Tiara Oso, that looked like taking something that was part of her youth and music growing up, bomba, Afro-Puerto Rican style of music, and then fusing that with hip hop, R&B, and pop, which was more of the music that she had been making in her professional career. So it's fusing those two. That was a main focus of her project. In terms of working with collaborators, that is something, I guess, working with collaborators and expanding instrumentation. Those are kind of similar. I'll use AJ's as an example from this last year. AJ had done a lot of composition for, individual artists and had done a lot of composition work, but hadn't had as many formal rehearsals with professional musicians. And so this was one of the first times that she was stepping into facilitating the rehearsals and composing for a larger group and directing those rehearsals. And so that was one way that she grew throughout this grant period. And then in terms of expanding instrumentation, one of the good examples there is City Councilor. Started off more as a solo artist, and then for Cedar Commissions, it's kind of funny, there's usually one of these people every year, but started off as a solo artist predominantly, and then wrote for a 12-piece orchestra. So it was just definitely a big palette change in pushing themselves in that way. And then the last kind of section is diving deeply into researcher themes. Anat Spiegel, a couple of years ago, she researched a couple different prominent women voices during the Holocaust and spent a couple months just reading those materials, kind of digesting that, and then created a piece that was inspired by some of those writings, taking some of those texts and setting them to music and writing new texts as well. Faisa, that was more of a personal research into her mother's migration story from Ethiopia, and learning some from her elders, more about playing traditional Ethiopian music on the karar. And then for Sana, this last year, they were looking into what possibilities there were for positive language within the Hmong language for queer and trans individuals, because positive words about queer and trans individuals is not part of the Hmong language. And so that was something that they set up a community forum and reached out to a lot of different community members to say, hey, what words would you propose in the what words would you propose to describe Hmong LGBTQ folks positively? And so that was the main focus of their project. And then articulating some of that language within the songs that they wrote. So summary from all of that is just, pushing yourself can look different for each of the different artists involved. We also ask for 1 page or 1.5 minute video describing your artistry. I think people sometimes come into this section really focusing on experience with private lessons, experience with classical composition and music theory and things like that. Those are really valuable, right? And also, I don't want people to discount the value of, self-teaching, playing in and writing for bands, being in the recording room, doing a lot of production on your own. That's also super valuable musical experience. I think sometimes people tend to downplay those experiences when compared to classical music theory and private lessons and things like that. I think that it's all super valuable. And what we want to know is we want to know what valuable experiences you're bringing to the table. Yeah. And then in terms of those audio and video work samples, the total length of those 2 work samples combined should be has to be less than 5 minutes. We ask people to articulate your role in the work sample. And so sometimes in past years, we would receive tracks where it's like, I'm not really sure what this person was responsible for within this, right? And so we just want to know, like, what is your role in terms of producing the track? What is your role in terms of composing, the various instruments or the instrumentation on the track? What is your role in terms of playing, singing, performing on the track as well? Let me see if I have any other notes there. I think I already touched on this for the question that you had asked, Scott, earlier in the section, but it should be something that demonstrates your skills and provides a good foundation for why you would be able to execute the project that you've proposed to us. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I had a quick question to add to that. Of those work samples, is there a like a time limit? Like, can it be older than 3 years old? Like what we're presenting as a work sample? Sure,
that's a great question. Yeah, just in terms of like what you're working on recently versus what you've worked on in the past. I think as long as it's still indicative of your current skills, I think that there isn't like a preference for it to be something that's like recent versus something that's in the past. Yeah, as long as it makes sense and it's supporting the project proposal that you've come up with, that's a good work sample. In terms of how artists are chosen, there's a review panel that is made up of a couple of local musicians, past Cedar Commissions artists, some community members, and members of the Cedar's Artist Collective, and then Cedar staff. And then we look at every application and we review them based on 4 main criteria. And that's project idea, the feasibility, does this artist articulate how they're an emerging artist and how they're going to push themselves, and then the quality and the case that people make for the work samples supporting their application. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these items here. These are all included word for word in the call for artists, and I think I spent quite a bit of time talking about that why question and thinking about why it's important to you and also why it's important in a larger context. So I'm not going to go through these word for word, but these are on that call for artists page, and these are the criteria that we rate artists on. These are the questions that we use. In terms of the timeline for notification, winners are going to be publicly announced on August 9th, 2021. The commission recipients will be notified that they've received a commission no later than July 30th. If you don't receive a commission, we are committed to providing feedback on applications as desired, as requested. That I think maybe 80% of the people who applied last year asked for feedback on their applications afterwards. So, and then in terms of other support with the programs, always feel free to email questions to me, rlayman@thecedar.org. Otherwise, we also will have an online question and answer session with past Cedar Commissions artist. The way that one is geared towards is we won't really be going over the stuff that we talked about in this session. That one is going to be geared towards people who have already started drafting up a project proposal and idea and want to ask a past Cedar Commissions artist some specific questions, just to kind of get their take on things and get their take on how the experience Cedar Commissions was for them. So that's going to be Saturday, June 12th, 2 to 3 p.m. It's free. It'll be like this, where it's a webinar. We'll also be recording it, and we'll be posting it up on our YouTube afterwards as well. You can find a link to that. Shasta might share that out. I think that there's a link up at the top of our notes sheet here. But otherwise, you can find that on the Cedar Commission's webpage as well. And I think that that brings us to the end of this section. Now we have a little bit of time for some Q&A. So yeah, same format as before. What questions do people have? Yeah, Corey.
Let me show my face. I'll be respectful. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. I guess my only question would be, this might have already been covered, but I guess in getting things ready as far as for the application or for the video that you would put out and say, like, all right, like already now, I'm sure everybody's minds are like turning and racing, or like, all right, like, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one with some like excitement and anxiety. You know, like, all right, you know, who can I, you know, because I think this is a really cool opportunity for anybody logged on here to have to do this. But anyways, I guess my question is, one is that, should we like just get the plan and collaborators, and like, I don't know, how do you suggest going about, like, should I call all those people like who I plan on collaborating with, or, you know, and then just getting all those confirmations, and then from there I can build my plan. So there's that. Is that how you suggest going about that? And then with the material, like, should we like creatively wait until, you know, obviously we're announced? Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering what makes a more solid case as far as like, so for this next month, for the application period, right, this is just kind of just confirming all those collaborators and making sure like that they're going to be able to be there and be part of it. And is like that good enough as far as like knowing kind of your plan and where maybe distribution funds are going to be distributed? Like, does that seem like a solid enough case, I guess?
So I think, yeah, definitely listing collaborators is something that helps your case in terms of feasibility. I think sometimes the committee raises their eyebrows a little bit when people haven't listed any collaborators. We're like, I'm not even sure like what this person's connections are. Like, are they going to be able to find a drummer? Are they going to be able to find a bassist? Are they going to be able to find this clarinet player that they really want? So yeah, I definitely think that that's something that's good to include as part of your project proposal. I think in terms of like that, whether or not the collaborators inform your final vision, or whether your final vision informs your collaborators, is kind of up to you.
Okay.
You know, I think for some people it's like, I know that these are the people that I want to work with. Let me craft like my artist vision from that. That might work well. For other people, it might work better to think about, okay, what do I ultimately want this to look like? You know, and think about it more conceptually and like personally, and then think about like, okay, who do I want to collaborate with on this idea?
Cool.
Does that help, Corey?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I guess just kind of like, and from here on out too, I'm sure all of us will kind of be like, from here on out, it's kind of like we got to put in our work to kind of, I guess, click on the little links and see how other people did the process. Because for me, I'm already trying to plan out, like, all right, like, if you know, if my application does make it, you know, like, you know, how do I, and I'm 4 hours away from the cities too, so you know, just trying to plan out too the collaborators. Then I'm bringing everybody there to you know, to perform it as well, and things like that. So but I don't know, but I'll probably see more and more of a lot of the end products throughout the years, of just kind of how other applicants went about it. And so yeah, so I guess I'm just trying to process all that right now. But I guess but for the most part, you are encouraging collaborators, and it will probably be good to just get all their, at least the confirmations, if you're for the application. That would probably be okay.
Yeah, or,
Cool.
you know,
So
at least tentative, at least tentative
Yeah.
agreements. You know, it doesn't have to be like 100% confirmed. You know, people.
Cool.
Like Elon, a couple of years back, he confirmed his bassist and his drummer, you know, like a couple months before the Cedar Commission. So
yeah.
And things change. You know,
definitely.
sometimes people get booked for gigs and, you know, are no longer available on that night. So we understand that too.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely gives it more of a little better, I don't know, understanding on the mission of the projects too, because you know, part of me too is like, well, I could totally write an album just by myself in my studio, and I'd love to you know, just take it all. But it's cool though. But this is awesome. The more and more I'm listening to it, it's getting me excited. Like, all right, cool. Like, do I want to stretch myself? Do I want to commit? Do I even want to commit to this? You know, so yeah, and I do, and this is really cool. So but yeah, thank you for processing that with me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Corey. I forget, there was something that I was going to say related to that. Oh, one of the other things that I wanted to articulate is like, it's definitely okay. Like, this is definitely a grant where it's okay if your project idea changes. You know, it's like what we want to hear from you is what is your ultimate vision for this project right now, right? And as you dig into that project, it's definitely okay if that project vision shifts. You know, for some people, it's like, I want to write like a full, or for some people, it's even like, you know, it's like, I want to write this mini part of a musical, right? And then that ends up being too big of a scope. So they're like, okay, I'm just going to write 3 songs from that musical, you know, and they're each like 10 minutes long. For other artists, I'm trying to think of ways that other artists' projects have shifted as well. But just know that it's really helpful to have a concrete project vision that you clearly articulate, but then also hold that there is flexibility for those things to change as well as you dive into the creative process. Yeah, Jenny?
Hi, I just learned how to raise my hand on Zoom for the first time. So I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and I'm wondering if people with other art forms that are not music are encouraged to incorporate their other art forms.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely been a part of past Cedar Commission's performances and project proposals. I think in terms of the ways that played out this last year, for Tiara's piece, she had a couple of musicians that were also bomba dancers. And so there was a dance element as well as the music element. In terms of Farrington's performance this last year, they kind of took like a traditional performance and just like threw it on its head. And so theirs was more of an installation. And it's kind of a pity that people weren't able to like be in the Cedar space and like experience this installation, because they were trying to create the experience of like what it would be like to be in Farrington's head in their room. But part of that was these visuals that were going on in the side. And so they collaborated with a visual artist to have these videos running on the side of the stage and then also in the back of the stage as well. There were other artists that were working with collaborators to try to have some like textured backgrounds or visuals in the backgrounds as well, but those didn't pan out. One of the artists, AJ, this last year was initially wanting to work with a sculptor who would like slowly assemble this piece that related to AJ's journey with bipolar and schizophrenia throughout the performance of it, but then she ultimately scrapped that idea as well. So I guess all of that is to say that, yes, working in a multidisciplinary fashion is encouraged, if that's what feels like the strongest like artist pull for you. You know, I would say like if it's something where it feels like, you know, I want to add this on because like this is going to be my push, this is going to be like me jumping into a different area, but it's not necessarily something that you're committed to, I would stay away from that, right? But if it's something where it feels like, you know, it's like you really have felt like you've wanted to meld like instrumental piano and spoken word poetry, and then also like breakdancing, right? And that's something where you have a little bit of experience in like maybe all of those areas, or maybe, you know, maybe you don't have experience in all of those areas, but that's something that is like a compelling project vision to you. Like that sounds super cool, you know. But if it's something where it's like, yeah, like typically I'm like playing a lot of acoustic guitar and like my push is going to be like to collaborate with a dancer, but like I don't really have a strong investment in like melding those two things together. I would stay away from that.
Hey,
Alicia,
can you hear me?
yeah, it broke up a little bit there, but I think you're back.
Okay, great. So I've never applied to anything like this before, so I think a lot of my anxiety is about like the application. What are like some common mistakes that people usually like for their application, and that like brings up, I guess, like a red flag during the review process?
That's a good question. I think you know, some of the ones are when people propose like recording a new album and having all of the money geared towards the recording process and recording equipment. That's like a red flag. If predominantly the project budget is going towards equipment purchases, that's also another red flag. I think like vague project descriptions, that's another red flag. We want there to be space to create, but we also want to see that you've thought about this a lot and have a clear vision for what that final performance or what that final product might be. I think if you're moving towards working with a lot of different collaborators, identifying at least a couple of those people with names as like people who you're connected to, who would be committed to the project, that's good to include. I think sometimes there's hesitancy when people list that they want to really expand their instrumentation without necessarily articulating that there are some of these people who are already a part of their network. And I think another red flag, I was talking about this earlier, is when people write more of like a skill development grant, where it's like, I have never played guitar before, but I really want to learn guitar during the 6 months. And that's a pretty steep ask, right? That's a pretty steep learning curve to go from like not playing the guitar at all to like performing in front of a live audience on the Cedar stage on guitar. And so there are other grants that are specifically focused more towards that skill development. And certainly that can be an element of the project proposal as well. But it shouldn't be like the primary focus. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's like kind of like red flags with applications. I mean, I don't really worry about this with any of the people who are here because you've taken the time to show up, you know, and that's an investment in and of itself. But, you know, seeing some applications where I don't know, like people don't quite go far enough. People don't quite give us much of their project idea. And it's not necessarily organized. Like those can be red flags as well. And I think too, like, you know, a short application isn't necessarily a bad application. Sometimes people are able to articulate their projects very concisely. So it's more about being clear and, you know, sharing a compelling project idea. Cool. Well, I think, let me just see. Yeah, I think we're 5 minutes over. But I can stick around a little bit if there are any final questions here.
I have to take off. Thank you, Robert. This was incredibly informative.
Cool. Great. Glad it was helpful. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
Yeah, no problem, Don. Oh, sorry, no problem, Nick.
Thanks.
So thanks everybody for being here. I'll stick around just for a little bit more. And if not, then we'll just kind of close it out.